Each year, rabbis have the privilege of carefully crafting their high holiday sermons. And the reality is, sometimes we only see our people on these days, and the message has to be thoughtful. What do we want our people to know and to think about in this coming year? What's important enough to discuss? What's urgent? And many rabbis find at least one sermon to bring Israel to light for either fundraising purposes or a plea for the Zionist cause. And I always feel that need as well, talking about the one country in the world that is the Jewish state, petitioning for our community, our global community, to remain connected. And this is nothing new, especially not at our temple. We all know the role that Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver played for Zionism, and most of our clergy since then. Rabbi Silver was an ally, an advocate, a fighter for Israel's creation and existence. One of the most famous quotes about Israel that he said, "The land of Israel will be small, but the people of Israel will make it great. Not in opulence, but in eminence will their destiny be fulfilled, and the elixir of their pride will be distilled not out of dominion or far-flung borders, but out of the faithful and skillful building of a good society." As I reflect on this quote at this season, particularly on the last few words, building of the good society, I ask myself, what would Rabbi Silver say about what's happening in Israel today? My temple family, today more than ever, I really feel like I have to offer words about Israel. Our tiny country in the Middle East, the place that we all take pride in saying is the only Jewish democracy in the world, is in need of desperate support. Not only because it's a Jewish state, but also because it's the only democracy in the Middle East. I'm worried. Israel's borders continue to be in contention and a safety risk, but in the last few months, arguably years, I'm more concerned with regards to what's happening within her borders. Israel has made dramatic and scary changes that are unsettling, and they threaten the very foundation of Israeli democracy. On Sunday, August 13th, 2023, Inbal Boxerman, a 40-year-old mother of two, was featured on the front page of the New York Times. As she tried to board the train with her two small children, Haredi religious men blocked her way. One of them told her that women were not allowed on, and that car was for men only. She had to wait for the next train or get on in the back. For Americans, this story stings in our ears as it sounds all too familiar. In 1955, Rosa Parks and other freedom fighters were in a similar situation where they courageously stood up against Black oppression. In her New York Times article depicting Inbal Boxerman's train experience, Roni Karin Rabin maintains that railways and segregated seating is illegal in Israel, but public transportation is the latest front on the culture war in Israel over the status of women in a society that is sharply divided between a secular majority and politically powerful minority of ultra-Orthodox Jews who frown on the mixing of women and men in public. She continues that although the Supreme Court has ruled that it is against the law to force women to sit in separate sections of buses and trains, ultra-Orthodox women customarily board buses in their neighborhoods through the rear door and sit in the back. Now the practice is spreading to other parts of Israel. Why is this happening? This, among other changes, are coming because of the result of a judicial overhaul. Because Israel is a coalition government, they find common ground with other parties in order to formulate a government. A desired win can sometimes bond very, very different individuals in hopes of being the first to form a coalition, which is what happened most recently. The current government has included extremist right-wing and ultra-Orthodox parties in their coalition as of late last year. As part of an agreement with them, the current government made certain concessions that have unsettled Israelis who are secular, including Arab Israelis, Reform Jews, and those of Israel's many other different faiths. As a part of the new government proposal, they're pushing to have public events have segregated audiences based on sex and allow businesses to refuse services based on religious beliefs in order to expand the powers of an all-male rabbinical courts, just to name a few emendations underway. Last month, ultra-Orthodox men in the religious town of Bnei Brak stopped a public bus and blocked the road because a woman was driving. People all over the country have uploaded videos on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms with their personal experiences getting bullied, pushed aside, unable to walk on certain parts of the street, board public transport, or even have assaulted secular women just for being secular. Some of the videos include men pushing women aside for wearing shorts or dressing immodestly and being judged subjectively. In a global gender gap report issued by the World Economic Forum in June that ranks 146 countries, Israel dropped to 83rd place from 60th just last year. Although the report ranked Israel first in terms of women's education, the country's ranking for women's political empowerment slipped to 96th place, just below Pakistan, in 61st place last year. There are fewer women in government than just a year ago. Two of the ultra-Orthodox parties in the governing coalition effectively ban women from running for office, ignoring a 2019 Supreme Court ruling saying that they had to end the practice. Many ultra-Orthodox men engage in religious studies full-time and do not work or serve in Israel's mandatory army, and yet they wish to expand the powers of the rabbinical courts, which base all of their rulings on Jewish religious law. The Orthodox Rabbinical Court already has jurisdiction over all marriage and divorce for Jews in Israel and gives only men the power to formally dissolve a marriage. The proposed changes would now also grant them possible jurisdiction over the economic aspects of divorce and allow them to act as arbiters in civil matters. And if lawmakers approve the bill, which has already passed a preliminary hearing, it will reverse a 2006 Supreme Court ruling that curbed the powers of rabbinical courts to arbitrate civil matters. I'd like to pause for just one moment. What is happening in Israel is not a partisan issue. We are unpacking what could be the demise of the Jewish democracy if changes aren't made soon. I'm not suggesting who you should vote for or support in the United States or in Israel, but rather shedding a light on the political and cultural realities of Israel at this time. Attempting to answer the question how we got here is long, but I will give just a little bit of context. In 2022, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, named Israel the fastest growing economy. It was the 18th wealthiest society in the world GDP per capita, higher than Belgium, Canada, and other first world countries. It was considered the fourth happiest country in the world. In other words, Israel punched way above its weight. But at this time, Israel is having a kind of identity crisis. According to Associate Professor and Scholar Amichai Magen, Israel's vulnerabilities have been hidden from view, and the parts that have been concealed in the background for so long are now coming to the forefront with two major weaknesses exposed. The first is cultural, and the second is institutional. Let's unpack the uncultural first. Israel's demographic is composed of a majority that has emigrated to Israel from North Africa, like my family, other Middle Eastern countries, Europe, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, and Eastern European countries, for the most part. Many of these immigrants came from places that did not have a strong tradition of democracy. This is also true of Israel's Ashkenazi elite that took part in founding Israel's government in the early 20th century. They arrived from Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East. Additionally, Israel was born in a neighborhood that is devoid of other democracies. The region has no underpinnings of democracy. So from this, we can already unearth that the cultural democratic roots of Israel were not as deep as we thought, or as reflected internationally as having to do with governance, which has profound ramifications. Israel's institutional vulnerabilities when it comes to democratic stability is also lacking. Israel has no codified constitutions or many formal checks and balances. They have relied on the norms of what Alexis de Tocqueville calls mores of democracy. Essentially, the custom or norms of a society are acceptable even if they are not bound by law. However, these mores have been eroding, and we have become much more polarized. What this means is that for 75 years, Israel has decided to not decide on critical questions that are normally settled by constitutional convention. No formal rules on separation of church and state, whether the ultra-Orthodox serve in the army or not. They have decided not to decide what the relationship is between the Jewish majority and the Arab Israeli minority that makes up about 20% of the Israeli population. These and others are very big issues that have been left unattended or undefined and leads us to where we are today. The questions of identity are bubbling and coming to the forefront and help us understand where Israel is at this moment. The peaceful demonstrations and mobilizations of civil society for the last 6 months have been a part of the ongoing pushback for Israeli civilians of all faiths and denominations. I also had the privilege of attending a protest when I was there in July, and the energy was truly contagious. I felt a sense of obligation to join the march, not as an Israeli citizen, but as an American citizen, as a Zionist, as a rabbi, as a woman, a mother, an advocate of democracy, and a reformed Jew. Now is the time to be uncomfortable and become deeply engaged. The reality with which we are contending with is a coalition government that wants to take Israel down a very dangerous path. Unlike the United States and other democracy, whoever controls the executive branch also controls the legislative branch, so there's no real balance of power. Whoever controls the Knesset controls the government. So the only formal checks and balances in Israel is the Supreme Court, or more broadly, the Israeli legal establishment, which is very robust and an independent body, as is the power of the Attorney General. So why now? On July 23, 2023, the Israeli Knesset passed legislation that will limit the Supreme Court's ability to rule on the reasonableness of government decisions. Put more simply, because Israel does not have a constitution, legislations that we as Americans may perceive as unconstitutional can more likely be passed in Israel unless it is halted by Israel's Supreme Court. The only governing body that has historically had the ability to stop a law from passing in Israel's high court, which has now been limited in power. The Supreme Court will only halt a law from passing if they deem it contrary to what is in the best interest of the majority of Israeli citizens. The day after, Israeli newspapers published an entirely black front page following the passing of the law to cancel the reasonableness standard. In little white text on the bottom, it reads, "A black day for Israeli democracy." As Americans, we understand the profound and integral role the Supreme Court plays in our government. What could this mean for Israelis? Well, the current government has promised to expand settlements in the West Bank. They've made comments denigrating the LGBTQ community, of which there is a very rich community in Israel. They are calling for stricter definitions of who qualifies as Jewish, separating women and men in public sectors of life like social events, public transportation, and even the beach. Arab Israelis and Palestinians will be subject to racist attitudes, and whatever possible plan for peace in Gaza and the West Bank will blow in the wind. Israel's strength will have repercussions all over the world, not just for the US, but also for the international system as a whole. Countries like Iran are watching what is happening in Israel very closely, as is the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and of course, Hezbollah and Hamas. We've made tremendous progress in the Middle East and Middle Eastern peace based on the understanding that Israel is powerful, cohesive, and a coherent international actor. If that is undermined, we could find ourselves in a much more precarious regional international environment with serious consequences for energy markets and stability in the Middle East, Europe, and beyond. These and many other concerns are at the precipice of what awaits us if we don't stand by Israel, Israel the democracy. On Rosh Hashanah, we read one of the most difficult stories in our tradition, the Akedah. To test Abraham's faith, God asks him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. In the last moment, God sends an angel and tells Abraham to pull back. What kind of test is this? How do we grapple with this difficult part of our tradition, especially on the days of awe when we're meant to reflect and engage in deep soul searching? Rabbi Alan Henkin argues that many of us want our Judaism to be comfortable and familiar. But he reminds us of the Hasidic thought called Mesirat Nefesh, the surrendering of one's self. Mesirat Nefesh has to do with a willingness to give up on the things that you hold dear to bring about something better. The story of the Akedah reminds us that the Torah of Abraham disputes the Torah of complacency, ease, and self-satisfaction. Rosh Hashanah summons us to engage in Cheshbon HaNefesh and Mesirat Nefesh. We need to find ways to relinquish parts of ourselves, our comfort, and engage in the uncomfortable and painful to create peace for the greater good. My Temple family, we are Reformed Jews. That is not just a gift, it is also an obligation. It is not just how we identify, it is a philosophy, it is a practice, a belief, and it is a trajectory. We talk about justice, and we stand for justice. We very proudly stand for equality and egalitarianism for all people. We cannot stand idly by as basic human freedom are in the balance. 8 months ago, Efrat Levin Yofi, an Israeli citizen, would have said that she is the least political person in the world. Raising her family in Pardes Chana, she considered herself a bookworm with a love for strengthening the women in her community from all walks of life, backgrounds, faith, religious, secular. Today, she spends much of her time meeting with women in small groups, helping them navigate the difficult day-to-day climate in Israel. Like Rosa Parks, she helps organize women in different neighborhoods to board public transportation and sit in the front few seats, helping those who are afraid become more comfortable, as it is illegal to push people to the back. In the evenings, when she's not advocating for basic human rights, she prepares red dresses and white caps that resemble the garb from Margaret Atwood's book, The Handmaid's Tale. For those of you who are unaware of the book from 1985, that has now become a very difficult television series to watch, it tells the story of a dystopian totalitarian state called Gilead, where women are forcibly assigned to families for the sake of producing children. Efrat and other women wear this attire on the streets as they protest, and the image is very powerful. Her photo was in the New York Times and others from her recent protests. I reached out to Efrat. That's how small Israel is. And when she and I spoke, she shared a few additional personal challenging realities. She said she had a 17-year-old daughter who's about to get drafted into the mandatory military, and she doesn't know what the outcome of her post will look like. She's so disheartened to see that the ultra-Orthodox political parties have outright banned women from participating in their political party. What would Abba Hillel Silver, David Ben-Gurion, Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King, Moses, and all of our fighters of justice say about what is happening in our world today? We must stand on the side of justice and peace for all. This is not just about Jewish values, it's about keeping democracy. Let us use this moment of crisis and turn it into opportunity. Let us find ways to elevate our differences and bridge them and commonalities to seek peace and stability. On this Rosh Hashanah, I pray that we courageously engage in the very difficult work that lies ahead here in our own country and with our friends and family across the ocean. I wish you all a Gmar Chatima Tova, a year filled with peace, joy, good health, more peace. Shana Tova.